Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Monday, June 14th. This is your daily Buckeye Fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 80 days, the game against Michigan in 166 days. Ohio State just wrapped up another big recruiting weekend, and as we did last week, we're going to wait until Tuesday's show to talk about that, so our insiders have time to get some post-visit reactions from players. So you have that to look forward to tomorrow. And besides, there's also a very interesting topic to discuss today anyway. The college football playoff came out late last week, made official what we've been hearing for a while, which is they're looking at a 12-team playoff. That's a bigger field than a lot of people probably were expecting, but going back through previous seasons, it would have led to a lot of really exciting games. My guest today is Bill Bender of the Sporting News. He wrote a bunch about this proposal, including a really interesting list of pros and cons to a 12-team field. Bill, I definitely have some issues with the proposal, and we can get to those in a second, but overall, it seems like, broadly speaking, there's a lot to like about this plan.
Yeah, and it happened at such light speed. I think it is the most inclusive plan possible. When you put 12 teams in, when you value the 4 conference champions, 6 conference champions total, you're allowing 6 at-large teams in. It gives the group of 5 a chance. It gives Notre Dame, we can talk about them later, a chance. I think it puts an emphasis on that top 4 spots and the conference championships, which have lost some value. And then the rest, there are some nitpicks with it, and you and I can get into those. I think the one that stands out to me the most is if you're going to put games on campus for a 5-12 team, and let's say Ohio State was a 5 seed, okay, great. We get a game at the shoe against somebody like Auburn or Texas A&M. But then if you're a 4 seed in your Ohio State and you're playing your first game in the playoff at a bull site, I just think that doesn't stick. That's probably the flaw in the Death Star, so to speak, that the one thing that they're going to have to tweak as they go on.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that in a minute. I have some thoughts on that. But just to lay it out for people who may not have heard a lot about the proposal in general, it's a 12-team field. Top 4 teams will all get a first-round bye. And here's the interesting part. Those top 4 teams all do have to be conference champions. You mentioned Notre Dame, so that means an independent like Notre Dame or BYU could not ever be a top 4 seed. And Notre Dame AD Jack Swarbrick was like part of this committee, so they are apparently okay with that. I thought that was a really interesting feature there. The top 6 conference champions get auto bids, as you mentioned. The other 6 spots will be going to at-large teams. So, yes, the teams ranked 5 through 12 will face off at the home field of the higher-ranked team. 12 will play at 5, 11 will play at 6, and so on. To me, having those first 4 seeds limited to just the conference champions, that suddenly makes championship weekend like a massive event. Like right now, it's like, oh, the Big Ten game matters, and the SEC game matters, and maybe the ACC game matters. That turns that weekend into the 5 Power 5 conference championship games matter. Maybe the AAC conference championship game matters a lot. I mean, all of a sudden, that is a massive weekend.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. And here's why. And let's say Ohio State's playing Wisconsin. Is that a conference championship game or is that a seeding game? And I think it's become more of a seeding game. And when it's a consolation feel to it when you lose that game and you still get a 9 seed. Now, one could argue, well, that's for the 3 seed every year in the Big Ten or higher. And that's fair. But I think that the conference championships take on, I would say it's a wash. Dealing with we're dealing with now is typically a conference championship game. Northwestern game last year, a perfect example where it's don't screw it up, Ohio State, get the Big Ten in the playoff. And that's what they've become now by and large. Even the ACC last year, Notre Dame and Clemson both got in. I also would contend it's going to change drastically how we watch the regular season. No singular Ohio State game, even the Michigan game, is going to have that weight that it typically does. And that's a concession college football fans. I think they're more willing to make it than I'm willing to believe, I guess.
Yeah, and that's interesting because the Michigan game could matter a ton. If Ohio State goes into that game with 1 loss and you lose a second game, then potentially you're out. If you go in unbeaten, you're probably going to make it either way. So it kind of makes it more or less important depending on the circumstances.
Well,
but
I guess I would say like the 16 Ohio State game stood out as one of the best in the history of the rivalry. Mm-hmm. And then you're thinking about, okay, if this was in a 12-team format, Michigan's a 10 seed anyway. They're going to go play Florida State or something in a playoff game. And I think that's going to change the way we look at coaching hot seats, because you look at Jim Harbaugh now, for example, no playoff appearances, 0-5 against the Buckeyes. in this format, he has 2 playoff appearances, for better or worse. And you never know what one of those, especially the 16 team, may have actually made a run in that format. So I think some of those adjustments are going to be made in terms of how we watch the game. And I guess the flip side, Tom, would be Ohio State's dominated that rivalry for so long. They've dominated the Penn State game. They've dominated the entire Big Ten. And some of this 12-team playoff momentum was created on the fact that Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson have dominated this sport probably more than we all anticipated when the playoff came out in the first place.
Yeah, and I mean, there are plenty of Ohio State and Clemson and Alabama fans right now who think this plan is going to hurt them because now there's more competition because they're basically in every year, more or less. Max Olson from The Athletic went in and figured out who would have been in the playoff every year since 2012. Ohio State would have missed it in 2012 because of the bowl ban. They would have been in the playoff every year since 2013, though. So, which is obviously, you go from a 0% chance of winning the national championship to some kind of a chance to win the national championship there. They would have played Oregon at the Horseshoe in 2013 and then probably played Baylor in the quarterfinals in 2014, would have gotten a bye that year. 2015 would have been in as a 7 seed, would have hosted North Carolina. 2016, that team you just mentioned, they got in as the 4th seed, but they would be the 5th seed. In this one, they would have hosted Western Michigan. 2016, they would have been the 4 seed, probably played Alabama in the quarters. 2018, they would have been a 4, would have probably played Notre Dame in the quarters. 2019 would have been a 2, played the winner of Baylor and Penn State. And last year, they would have played the winner of Indiana and Texas A&M in the quarters. And, I mean, it seems to me, I know that you have more games to win, but someone's going to win it every year. It seems to me like that works out just fine for Ohio State. If you have more, chances at this and you have superior talent to just about everyone else in the country, you should want every bite at the apple you can possibly get, even if it's going to be a harder road. Am I wrong there?
No, I mean, because a couple of those Ohio State teams that jump out, 15, the one that lost to Michigan State, even before in the BCS era, you could make a list of 9 Ohio State teams that didn't play for a championship that could have, maybe even more since the BCS era started. So it does give those Ohio State teams more chances. I look at that 15 team and I saw what Joshua Perry was tweeting about that last year. He's like, I'm not sure we would have been national championship caliber despite the talent. Team lost to Michigan State. But then they turned around and then they blasted Michigan and Notre Dame in back-to-back weeks. And you kind of, if you think of it in that vein, it's like the Notre Dame game is probably a quarterfinal. It's probably a round of 8 game. And then Ohio State with Zeke and Boza and Cardale and it was Barrett then, I suppose. And Michael Thomas. I mean, that team could have made a run. So for the Ohio State fans worried that more teams is going to hurt them, I would say until Ohio State and Alabama in particular stop producing NFL talent at the rate they're producing it, especially 4- and 5-star guys that become first-round picks, those 2 schools are going to have nothing to worry about. It may lead to Penn State getting a little better. I think Wisconsin will benefit tremendously from this format because they'll actually get some playoff swings that they haven't been able to get.
Yeah, that's a team that hasn't quite gotten over the hump, Penn State as well. But you could see Wisconsin getting in there as a 10 seed, 9 seed in a lot of these years. Even if they lose that Big Ten championship game, they're potentially still in that field in some format. And yeah, I mean, it would just be nice to see some of those other teams get a chance at it. Like it just, right now, college football is getting a little stale. It feels like if I take 5 teams this year and I say Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, and Oklahoma, and give you the other 125 teams, like I'd have to give you some pretty good odds to get you to take that bet. And
I think you're getting 3 playoff teams there at least.
Yeah.
And we haven't released ours, but that'll be 4 of our playoff teams will come off that list, all 4. And you're right, and there is a staleness to it, but the one thing, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, the one thing I keep telling people is it is going to turn college football a little bit into the NFL, but whether or not they like that, because I like the differences between the 2 sports. But the example I keep using is, last year, Cleveland Browns went to Pittsburgh, and I think it was week 6 or week 5, and they got blasted. Pittsburgh just destroyed them. It was ugly. They were talking about Baker Mayfield not being the right quarterback. Well, 12 weeks later, Browns beat the Steelers in the playoffs, and now the entire tenor of that division has changed. So the regular season games, they'll still matter. I mean, Michigan, Ohio State will still matter. The Iron Bowl will still matter. But we'll be spending our Saturdays. I guess the trade-off is there'll be 7-8 games on any given Saturday where you and I are sitting in the press box wondering, okay, this has playoff implications. And I think that's kind of a cool thing, but we're still dealing with at-larges. And that's going to be funny because you've got to figure the SEC and Big Ten will dominate those at-large bids.
Yeah, I think I saw that they went back and it was like 30 something SEC teams would have made it, and like 23 Big Ten teams, and no one else had more than 15. So it is those two conferences by and large that would be putting teams in the field, at least, based on history. The thing that's interesting to me is all of the conference championship games matter now because they're all automatic berths, which means all of the games to determine the division champions matter so much more in all of those conferences. So now you're going from like 5 or 6 games each week that have playoff implications in late November to possibly 12 or 15 or more. I mean, college football has gotten a lot more regionalized, it feels like, in recent years. Like, I don't know how much people on the West Coast are really like die hard into college football, because it's just the Pac-12 is kind of like you get to mid-October and it's like, and everyone's out and see you next year. Now all of a sudden that matters. So that seems like a big win. And also, I mean, you want to talk about teams not having an opportunity to play for the national championship. Everyone outside of the Power Five is functionally out of the playoff race already this year because the committee is never, ever, 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 ever going to put anyone in. Maybe this year, if Cincinnati, if everything falls exactly right and they beat Notre Dame on the road and they beat Indiana on the road, like maybe, but that's about it. It just seems to me like it's so long overdue that the other half of this sport actually has a chance to maybe make the college football playoff and maybe actually play for the national championship that they're theoretically eligible for.
Well, and my concern there would be this. Let's say Cincinnati does what you just painted this year, and they get into they beat Notre Dame, they beat Indiana, they run the table in the AAC, they look good doing it. Luke Fickell campaigns hard, and they slip into that 4th spot. I think their playoff road then is much easier than if you go back and look at if last year was a 12-team playoff. You would be asking Cincinnati to go through Georgia, and Georgia beat them. And I know that was a close game, but Georgia had a lot of guys opt out. So you're asking them to go through Georgia, Bama, Notre Dame, and then the Ohio State Clemson winner. I don't see a Group 5 school ever being able to do that. The only Group of 5 school I've thought in my lifetime, and BYU doesn't count in 1984, that was an independent, that Boise State team that lost to Colin Kaepernick, Nevada, was a legit national championship contender. But they would only had to win one game if they would have got in. And I think it's going to be extremely hard just because of, like you said, the superior talent factor, the rosters, those kind of things, not to mention going on the road potentially for a Group of 5 school to win 4 playoff games. But I guess the trade-off is now those programs can't say you're never going to let us in. The UCFs of the world will get a chance to prove it. And to me, in some ways, it's be careful what you wish for, though. I mean, we're the same guys that watched Ohio State beat Cincinnati. I think it was 49-0 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it would be interesting to see that 2017 UCF team, like you mentioned, get in. I would have loved to see Coastal Carolina last year or BYU. Like, I mean, and if they lose, they lose. But I don't, it may also be just if they win that first round game. That's the Oral Roberts beating Ohio State. Like, Oral Roberts doesn't have to win the national championship. That's still a cool moment for Oral Roberts. I did want to get to, we talked about it a little bit off the top. I did want to get to some of the stuff I don't like. And when I say I don't like it, I mean, it is a fantastic example of the absolute worst parts of college football. After that first round, the quarterfinals, so the rounds of 8, 4, and the championship game are all at neutral sites. So the New Year Six Bowls will host the quarterfinals and semifinals on a rotating basis. They're all part of the playoff every season. I mean, that's great for them. But now Buckeye fans or Alabama fans who want to go see their team on a championship run have to shell out for 3 separate bowl trips, around New Year's Day and then twice more in January. And I'm not sure where you stand in this, but I would much rather prefer to see them play those quarterfinals at campus sites and then maybe work in the bowls after that. I mean, what do you think?
Well, a couple of things they need to do. One, they need to tweak that immediately. So the first 2 rounds, the 5, 12, 8, 9, those games, those all need to be on campus. Then the next round needs to be on campus. Then you can do it like you do the playoff. That's what I assumed they would do when this whole plan was unveiled, and they didn't do that. And then number 2, I think something they need to do, and it's probably in the best interest of the sport to me, is cut off a regular season game. Then you have 11 regular season games, a championship game, The absolute most a school could play to win a national championship would be 16 games, which is already equal to an NFL, well, before this year, an NFL regular season. And then I think that's just the right thing to do. You're asking FBS athletes to play 16 games. That's more than enough. I would even go down to 10, but they'll never do that because you've got to play a couple non-conference games. And with conferences playing 8 and 9 conference games too, that makes it very difficult. But those are a couple tweaks I would make to the model. And then the reseeding part, right? They don't plan on reseeding. So, Ohio State's sitting there number 1. Let's say they go 12 and 0, 13 and 0, and they're number 1, 5 seed wins, and then the 11 seed and 10 seed and 9 seed win, and Ohio State's playing a 5. People aren't going to like that when that happens either. That's one thing the NFL does get right with their format is the reseeding factor.
Well, you were on a call with Bob Bowlesby, and he talked about the player safety thing, and I didn't really like his answer on that. It was kind of like, yeah, it'll be fine. It was like, will it though? Will it be okay? The other thing I didn't really care for was his answer about why not play the quarterfinals on campus sites. I mean, he gave the usual crap about the hallowed traditions of the bowls, as if 10 years ago, the 2011 Peach Bowl wasn't literally unranked 7-5 Auburn against unranked 8-4 Virginia. Like, the Peach Bowl is an extremely important and hallowed bowl because they built a new stadium and they got, the finger of fate landed on them. And it's like, oh, now you're important. Good job.
Right.
But I'm going to read you his quote. This is an exact quote from Bob Bowlesby. I would love to get your thoughts. Here we go. In quote, I think you also run into just that very practical aspect of, I'm not sure that playing in East Lansing, Michigan on January 7th is really a good idea. I think those games probably do in significant ways favor warm weather schools, but there has to be some accounting taken of stadiums that have to be winterized in the months of December and January and the like. There are some practical aspects to it. There are some philosophical aspects to it. Bill, you are a Green Bay Packers fan. Can you imagine the utter impossibility of trying to play a football game in, I don't know, let's say the state of Wisconsin during the month of January? Have you ever heard something as ridiculous as that?
Well, I watched Tampa Bay go up to Green Bay and do just fine last January, unfortunately, and Tom Brady looked just fine doing it. So I get it. I think that's an SEC Big Ten thing. I mean, that there's definitely something to that from there. But again, they play NFL games in December and January. And if you want to tilt it that I know the classic argument from when I lived down in the South was I don't see Big Ten teams coming down here in August. And yes, it's very hot in Charlotte and places like that in August. It's awful. And the humidity is horrible, but no more humid than the softball game my girls didn't want to play in last week. So hot is hot. But yeah, I mean, you want to see those are always the mental pictures I enjoy is you picture that first weekend of December and LSU's coming up to the shoe, or, Wisconsin goes down to Tuscaloosa, or, a Boise State gets to play at Happy Valley. And those are just the scenes you want to see. And that's what makes college football special. Sounds like we're going to get full stadiums this year too. It's going to be a cool thing to bring that sport back. So, I mean, I disagree with Bowlesby's comments there. If they do play a playoff game in East Lansing, those fans certainly would be over the top about it, I'm sure.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. It's one of those things you've kind of talked about for years as, you're just sort of sitting around BSing about college football. And it's like, can you imagine what would happen if Alabama had to come up and play in Columbus in January? Like, I mean, those so many legendary NFL playoff games are bad weather, cold weather playoff games. Like, introducing that into college football would not be a bad thing. I'm going to let you go on this. I saw that you would prefer an 8-team playoff to the 12-team model. I'm like kind of coming around to the 12-team plan outside of some of the bowl and campus site stuff. But why do you think 8 is a better number than 12?
You know what? I'm kind of like you. At first blush, when the Pete Thamel's report came out, I was just totally against this 12-team thing. And now they obviously thought this out. And they made it clear that they'd been working on this for a couple of years. And they did it without leaks and those kind of things. And they thought this out pretty well. I still think 8's a better model, and here's a couple reasons why. I know the 12-team model seems precedented on the SEC and Big Ten are going to be fine with it because they'll get more teams in it, and they'll get more schools in it, they'll get more money, et cetera. But on any given year, I don't think there's more than 6 teams capable of winning it all. I don't want to get too far from the truth, where you get a team like an Ohio State that might be good, and they would benefit from that one less game as like a 5-team, that 2015 team. Again, another perfect example. I know I keep harping on them. because you would like to see what they could do. Maybe they don't win 4, but they could win 3. I put up a Twitter poll last week, and I asked Twitter, because that's the right answer for everything, right? That what's the best number, 4, 6, 8, or 12? And I think 55% voted 8, and less than 25% combined went for 4 and 6. So clearly 8 or 12 is the way to go. But I still think 8's a little bit better. But like you, I mean, the more I look at it, I'm like, I'm going to watch it. I'm going to see it. There are some risk factors to it. And like I said, you would be naive to believe that it's not going to change how you watch the regular season. But I'm almost starting to believe that that's more of an argument for like kind of traditionalist guys like me. And we'll end up coming around like we do everything else.
Yeah, I voted in your poll. I voted for 8. I think I might now vote for 12 because, I mean, you said there's only 6 teams that really, are really good enough to win it. There's a certain argument that, like, if you're the 10 seed and you beat the 7 seed and then the, whatever, the 3 seed and then the 2 seed and then the 1 seed, like at that point, like you might have the best resume in the country, even if you didn't have a fantastic regular season. So it may be a problem that sort of sorts itself out. As I mentioned off the top, you have written a ton about this recently. Let people know where they can find that, where they can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm at BillBender92 at sportingnews.com. And this week, I had all this stuff loaded up for last week, but we'll have our top 25 quarterbacks this week. And that's a list I always like to put together. We put a lot of thought into it. There will be an Ohio State quarterback on there, which we can get into next time maybe. But because we don't 100% know who the starter is, but I think one of the most interesting parts of that list, and you can see, the game within the game in college football right now is Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State aren't just the best programs in the country. They're producing the best quarterbacks in the country. And you saw that in last year's draft and the year before that. There's a little competition within the competition. So with all 3 schools having new starters under center, I think it makes this season, that's one of the best storylines of the season, is which one of those quarterbacks really steps up.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the big X factors this year because, I mean, it seems like there's not a lot of questions at the top of the sport, but, I mean, that's 3 teams right at the top of the sport that, if Oklahoma was a level below and Oklahoma says Spencer Rattler coming back and everyone else is breaking in a new quarterback, like maybe that kind of levels the playing field a little bit this year. So, yeah, that will definitely be interesting to watch and interesting to read. Bill, thank you for joining me. Really appreciate your insight in all of this. And also make sure you guys check out BuckeyesCoop.com. We will have a full week of coverage at Ohio State camp. We'll be out there Tuesday and Wednesday this week again, and have tons of coverage there. Also, make sure you check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/BuckeyesCoop. Just hit subscribe right there. You'll get notified every time we post a new video, a new podcast, a new interview with players, new video from camp. I mean, we have a ton of stuff up there, and all you have to do is subscribe. You get it all for free. That's youtube.com/BuckeyesCoop. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.